Welcome to the Franchise Frontier, the podcast where we explore the evolving franchise landscape, dive into latest industry trends, and share actionable tools and tactics to help you build and grow your business.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Franchise Frontier podcast, where we dive into latest industry trends, talk to business owners, and talk about tips and tricks that might help you get involved in business. So today, I'm excited to invite Chad Shepler from Gatsby Glass in Austin, Texas. Chad, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Appreciate it, man.
So usually when we get into this, one of the things I like to find out right away is to kind of understand your journey, right? What inspired you to become a business owner? And was there something specific that made you choose the particular brand?
Yeah. So that's a loaded question. The journeys. If you go back to the beginning, I actually started my life as an architect. So I was always passionate about the built environment, but ended up not deciding not to practice full time, and got lucky through a random circumstance and ended up at a startup company about 20 something years ago. And it sort of started a journey for me that I've been on for over 20 years now, which is I absolutely love sort of being on the ground floor with my hands dirty, solving problems, building companies, right? And that's taken place in a couple different countries and in several different industries. But that's sort of, you start with this passion for the built environment, and then you love sort of being on the ground floor, getting your hands dirty, building stuff and making stuff. So, an opportunity came in the marketplace where, in Austin, Texas, if you've not heard of it, it's a very big, booming, growing town. It's been that way for 20 plus years. And there's a missing trade base here that some of the other larger cities have. And so I think there's just an opportunity, or there was for me an opportunity to step out there and do a startup that was trying to go after being, a premier or the best partner to custom builders and general contractors, right? Someone who can communicate well, who can have transparency, who can deliver, technology wise on design and logistics, and sort of be a preferred partner. And so when I went looking around for product types, it was a very specific box I wanted to be in, right? I still wanted to feel like I was a designer, like building stuff, designing stuff, which I think Gatsby gives me that, and we can talk through that. But I wanted to be, truly in the built environment, working with builders and contractors. And so sort of narrowed my focus down to Gatsby, and, just past the year mark. And so here we are.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting way to get back to your roots,
Yeah,
right?
for
You are
sure.
an architect at heart, but at the same time, you also enjoy building businesses. And so there's probably a small box, like you said,
Yeah.
that can let you do a little bit of both, right? Lets you still run a business on the ground floor, but at the same time, still checks the box of that design element and or niche business that sometimes you can get with being an architect. So kudos to you for finding that business. So a lot of times when we talk about this, you said you just got through first year. Walk us through that first year as the business owner. Talk to us just a little bit about, obviously you said that you have done this a few times in a few different locations. And I'm sure every one of those, while they have similarities, they probably have their own things as well. Couple things that you work through that have happened in other businesses, right? That also happened in this one, and some ways that you've worked through it.
Yeah, overall, I would describe the first year as very successful. Certainly from a growth, and we can talk about that in top line. The first year is never your most profitable year, so you have to take that with a grain of salt. You read the tea leaves, the opportunities there and the margins there. So step back for a second, right? I said I've done this before. I certainly have never done it in the trade business, but I've done it before, and so I would say one of probably the most eye-opening lucky factors for the first year was that I had done this before. And so I was an early employee at Instacart, the grocery delivery company. And, while they're absolutely totally different industries, the scale at which we grew for 4 or 5 years straight was nothing short of crazy. And so every day you were sort of breaking the operational model that worked the day before. If you could hire 100 shoppers in a weekend, can you hire 10,000? And it's like, you can't hire 10,000 by interviewing them in person. It's like, well, how do we do it? And so, I sort of lived through some of the cycle of that I think helped give me a healthy perspective. Gatsby is a young brand. Horsepower is a young brand, frankly. Although, all the executives have great experience, they're still a young coming together for, just from longevity standpoint. Gatsby's a younger brand. And so I think when I came into it, I understood that. I understood the chaos of being on the front line. And so when you're in a model like this where there's new franchises launching, right? Each new franchise, you and I were talking earlier about Discovery Day and Academy. There's a learning process that the brand is going through on who's the right franchisee, what's the right model, what's the right product types, and certainly what's the right launch strategy. How do we train? How do we give them operational tools? And so I think that first year, maybe I was franchise, I was in the first 15, maybe, right? If you think about it. And so you have to assume if you're in the chaos phase, right? You're in the Wild West phase where, no one really actually knows what you're going to be 10 years from now. And so there's little seeds of it. You can kind of see the seedlings of what it's going to be, but there's lots of change, mostly in a good way, meaning like you're replacing this system with that system because this system's better now that you had time and as a brand. And so I think that whole first year, we had success because Austin's a fantastic marketplace. We had success because, particularly for us, Gatsby had a great brand. It resonated with builders and general contractors, and they felt like we had been around for a while. Had great brand presence. Obviously, I have an architectural background, so being able to design things and communicate with that typical kind of customer was easier for me. And so, the harder parts became the operational parts. And so as, I think of the first year of a franchise in the trade business, I think that was probably the most eye-opening part of it was how complex it is to go from, like, I think if I look at my first 8 months of, my launch year to my first 8 months of this year, I'm over 2x per month, right? And that sounds great, and that shows you good, linear progression. But when you start to talk about that and say, like, okay, if you did $50,000, last year at this time, you do 150 this month. Like, what does that look like? How many more orders is that? How many more installs? And it's substantial, right? You're ordering 3 times the amount of hardware. You're getting 3 times the amount of deliveries. You've got maybe 2 times the amount of staff. And so, I think that is probably coming into it, I felt more comfortable with the chaos, but I definitely have had to spend way more time upfront in the operation, really understanding. Like, hey, I used to be a designer. I know how it works, but now I'm the guy who has to figure out how to get it here on time, get it built right, and get it installed to customer spec in a way that while still being profitable. You can't spend 40 hours doing shower, right? But at the same time, I think that was probably for me the whole first year was a wild lesson in that, which is like, how do you do it? Storefront for commercial, mirrors for gyms, high-end showers. And then once you figured it out, it was like, how do you do it and reduce your error rate? How do you do it and increase your efficiency, right? So that you sort of start to get to, all right, I know what we're capable of doing in a day. I know what we're capable of delivering. Am I pricing it right? Am I getting the right margins out of it? Then all of a sudden in the middle of last year, right, you have a presidential election and tariffs start coming out from everywhere. So it's like, again, I think having done this multiple times, I think that perspective has helped because when tariffs came around, I just thought it was another opportunity to figure out how to get better at this business because I know change is always coming. Like it's just what's happening. And so as opposed to being a polarizing or sort of terrifying, moment, it's sort of like, all right, this is another chance to sort of sharpen the pencil and figure out where the business goes.
That's awesome insight. And so, do you think that your background with Instacart, I guess with chaos in general, right? With chaos in general, I think for you, it sounds like that is a trait that in business ownership is if you can do that at a high level, if you have the ability to figure it out at a high level, but also realize that, how do I find the faucet in the storm per se, instead of looking at the storm and realizing, man, how are we going to do this? It's this is how we're going to do this. Would you say that that's a trait that is oftentimes can be learned, but at the same time, that's one of the things that we should look at in all business owners. How do they deal with that stress? Not the stress of how much money am I making, because there's a reason behind it. How do I get through the conversation of tariffs? Or is this just another thing? If it's not tariffs, it's going to be this. If it's not that, it's going to be that. So understanding how to compete inside the chaos.
100%.
Yeah.
It's funny because one of the mistakes that I have made in the past, and I think a lot of startups do, is you hire the wrong people. And that can sound like a harsh statement, but most of the time it's not because they're not really skilled people. It's that they're not capable of working in that environment, right? And that environment could be a small company, could be a fast growing company. And I think that from the horsepower brand, from Gatsby, I think if I just look out at the landscape of small business, there is a lot of people who may say to themselves, "Hey, man, I've been working in a huge company. I've made some money. I understand I have a passion for a particular project or a niche, and I'm going to go start my own company." But like the number one thing you should say to yourself, and this is the hardest part because I do not have the right answer for this, which is, are you capable of working in that kind of chaos? And the hardest part is that the only reason that I know that I am is because I got lucky when I was 20, right? I didn't do it intentionally. I just got lucky when I was young. Right? I could have worked for 10 years at a very steady Eddie, very large company and been successful and thinking, well, this is what I do. I'm very good at this. But I was just had an opportunity early on to sort of understand that I could manage myself in that sort of level of chaos. And if I
Yeah.
go back to mistakes that I've made hiring people across a bunch of different companies, it's not because they didn't have a great resume. It's actually not because they're not super talented. It's because they are equipped to operate with a playbook that is very spelled out for them, like chapter 2, chapter 3. And there are people who are capable of reinventing the wheel and like looking for the tree in the storm. I think some people can move from one side to the other, but it is a really hard thing if you've never done it. You don't want to discourage someone from it because they could absolutely be the next best entrepreneur. But at the same time, if they've never done it before, it's really hard for them to know whether they're capable of it.
Yeah, absolutely. To your point, I was a college football coach for about 15 years, and I I cannot explain to people the chaos of a game day.
Oh yeah, I can imagine. Yeah.
In a practice, it's like anything. When you don't have a job and you're talking about a hypothetical job, when I'm talking about a play and I'm standing on the field and I can tell guys, move 2 steps to your right, move 3, if this were to happen, this is how we would do this, that, or the other. Same thing with your job is one thing. When you're in the job and you have to stand behind the white line and your people have to go out and do said thing at a high level, it's chaos, because when something happens, when the guy jumps off sides, when this we forget this tool, whatever it is, it just increases the anxiety. It's interesting. I've done a bunch of these podcasts and I've talked to many different people, and you just touched on a great point that the difficult portion, one of the most difficult portions of it, is hiring people, hiring the right people. And I think that there's a lot of elements to that. There's the element of whether or not they can do the job, which their resume says they can, and they can. There's the element of, can they do the job in the chaos that could come around? And third, can they do the job and also carry the vision and the culture that you want to provide for your business? And I think that those 3 elements, and you hit the nail on the head, because you didn't hire the wrong people, but you didn't know what you didn't know as you were trying to build your team. It's almost like, I've heard it from a lot of people, it's almost the second round of the team that is the team, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's actually not. That's pretty common. That's pretty common.
The first round of the team are just all foul tips, maybe. It's no one's fault. It's
No,
just
that's yeah.
everyone's trying to settle in.
Well, I think it's an important point to make, and I try to make it to fellow owners is like it's no one's fault. I mean, ultimately it's your fault, right? You have to take responsibility, but like it's a no fault zone. And so, I think you go back to that, hire fire, and I think it does help some folks through that difficult part of like, is this person not the right fit for my team? And, if you think about it from the lens of like, you're not saying they're not talented. You're not saying they're actually not wonderful at certain skill sets. It's just not the right fit. Culture, like you said, culture. Can they react to the play that's happening? Can they anticipate the next play? Can they live the culture of this team? And, they may have one or two of those things, and they may be really strong on one or two of those things. But at the end of the day, when it's game time, like you got to have all three. It's just the way it works.
And you also made a great point too about the fact that, somebody who's looking into buying the business, you really have to decide, can I operate at a high level in that environment? So going back to what you just said, that another part of that anxiety or that pressure is hiring and firing now, and not based on necessarily somebody who is doing a bad job, but they're not doing the job you need them to do. So there's a whole nother added portion of that when getting into business ownership.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's tough for folks. I mean, I empathize with folks when everyone sits on that sort of that starting line of like, hey, do I make this investment? Am I the right franchisee for this marketplace? I think about, from what I can gather from, the last year or so, about half the people that fall into that category don't know whether they're good at crossing that line yet. And that's daunting because, it's like you're sort of, you're at the starting line and you have to make that call. I think there's ways to train around that. I think there's ways to support it. And I think that's, part of the reason I gravitated to Gatsby Glass was that it's not a solo brand by itself, right? That it's part of a larger parent company, that's going through this across multiple brands. And to me, that gave me tons of comfort. Like, I knew the chaos that was coming, but I also knew the level at which they would adapt to it and like evolve would be so much faster than I could do on my own for sure. But even me as a franchisee in a kind of a single vertical brand would get to, right? And so, I think that was the thing for me looking back to the trade business, which is like, hey, this is hard. Obviously, it's hard because, if it was easy, everyone would be doing it. Trades would be everywhere. And so I got, sort of eyes wide open, went into this knowing like, God, this has got to be way harder than it seems on the outside. And then when I got into it, I'm like, holy crap, like this is crazy. Uh, and then you sort of to feel around the room to kind of figure out where, and that's been, maybe in the last 6 months more than the first 6 months, but the blessing of Gatsby and horsepower and some of is that every time I sort of turn around and think about AI, and it's like I'm getting introduced to a solution that's specific to what I'm trying to solve. Maybe it's not solving everything, but it's like, oh, I'm glad you guys are focused on that. I can go back to the front lines and focus on this for a little while. SEO. You pick your vertical. All of us come to the table with different skill sets, but it certainly makes me feel better focusing at the biggest problem in front of me, knowing that there's groups of people behind me trying to figure out how we do this better so that I can feel confident in front of a client saying like, I know I can stand behind my pricing and I know I can stand behind delivering to you the quality that
There's definitely a lot to be said, and oftentimes we don't talk about it that much because it's assumed. But you're right. The brand team is looking at the sales process and this and that and things that are coming down the pipe so that you as the franchisee can be able to say like, hey, is this something? Is it like we're going to test it so that way you don't have to, right? You
yeah.
get to see, we implement it, etc. So that's cool. Before I get into the boring questions about day-to-day operations, etc., I wanted to ask you, being that you've done this a few times, being that you've been in business for a while, talk to me about your why. And don't give me the standard answer. That give me, if you really had to strip it back and say, I do this because, I use this example. Somebody says, I've been on 5 plane rides this week and I'm done with that. So for you, as you went through this process, and I know you've done it in different steps, what's your why been and kind of what has it grown to as you've done this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a misnomer for some folks, right? Your why does evolve over time, right? And that could be you discovering what it actually is, or it just evolves as you sort of get closer to trying to solve it. I mean, if you go back to the beginning, for me, it's a little easier. as a kid, loved architecture. I loved construction. I gravitated towards that really young. That was my undergraduate, out of the gates. So, I started with that passion, so to speak. And, while I did build companies in very different industries, I always liked a physical product. I don't know. It was something for me. I don't know why. It's like I liked being able to deliver a physical thing. So even a service to me was a physical thing. But I'm one of those people that I go like 99 miles an hour all the time. So it's like I've always known this. My poor wife knows this about me. We've been married for 20 years. And so because of that, I try to pick things that I'm passionate about. And so I've just always known that, like, whether it's the built environment or providing a service, like, those things can get me excited and can get me excited every single morning when I wake up. And so, like, I used to think of Instacart as like the most intimate thing you can do for somebody, right? You're delivering dinner to a family. You're feeding a family. Like, it's a very intimate, like, and so same thing for building a home, right? It is literally like the center of your universe, right? For whether you're single, whether you're married, whether you have children, it becomes the center of your universe. So I know it seems a little bit cheeky, but, like, your shower may not be the most important part of your house, but, like, your railing, your sliding glass doors, like, you name it. If you're a restaurant, the front facade of your building, like, these are impactful, very powerful elements for you. So that's why I got excited about design, being in the built environment. But the thing for me about sort of the chaos or the startup, is that I just like to solve problems. Like, I don't necessarily like repetitive tasks. I wouldn't want to have to stamp a report every month, working for someone else. And so I have always found it energizing to, like, sort of solve the problem and then, like, repeat the process, right? Now that we've done that, what's next? What's next? What's next? And what does that uncover for us? Like, we go from 150,000 in sales to 600,000, in 2 months. Like, what does that mean? Like, how many cars do we need? How many installers? Like, how,
Right.
how would we do that? How, can we take that much inventory to our warehouse door? And so, I think starting with a passion and then being able to discover fairly early on that, like, that's what lit me up. Like, that's what got me excited, and that, I could build a skill set around that, that I could be proud of. At the end of the day, it's like I have 3 young children, and it's like I always rep the brand. I'm always wearing the shirt. Like, I always believe in what I'm doing, and I've got little shirts for my kids. And so it's like we live whatever brand we're in. It's sort of just a thing for us, and so I think that helps the why. My kids understand that we're doing something cool, we're delivering something that people really want, and that we're passionate about doing.
That's incredible. And I think that the thing that's cool about it from an outside perspective is to hear back to how you said, you've always been into architecture, you like to build things. It's interesting how moving forward now, everything about your business is a puzzle for you. You're building a puzzle. How are we going to get this much inventory into here? How does this puzzle piece fit into here in terms of sales? How does this fit into here in terms of operations? How does this fit? I think it's really cool to see that. And then the next part that you touched on, which I think for especially home service businesses is the number one thing, is you got to rep the brand. People don't know what you're doing unless you tell them what you're doing. And you have to be excited about it. Maybe you don't have to wear the same black polo every day. Maybe it's a hat, maybe it's a t-shirt, whatever it might be. But you got to rep the brand because, again, you don't know. You could be at a soccer event, you could be at the grocery store, and somebody goes, "Oh, what's that?" And you'll be able to be very community centric, be able to dive in and them know, I met this gentleman at the grocery store who was very passionate about his business. He was there with his young kids. They live actually in the same neighborhood as I do. For sure, I would love to create business for that for that gentleman. So that's hats off to you for that, for sure.
Yeah, I think you're right, though. It's definitely a very community first. The trade business is very community for, like, local community first, and I think that was maybe something I understood, but not, like, you hadn't felt it. I hadn't empathized with what that actually felt like, and it's nice because you're at the end of the day, you're not Walmart, you're not headquartered in Arkansas, like you are. It's like, yeah, you might have a back office somewhere, but it's like, no, I live in your neighborhood. Like, I drive the street. Like, our kids go to the same school.
Yeah.
I'm trying to deliver service like right here in my backyard.
Yeah.
I think that that means something.
There's a lot to be said for that too, in terms of just people understanding. And then, Austin is obviously growing and growing and growing exponentially. And it's like, how do you become a part of that where while it is getting big, there's something to be said for homegrown businesses. There's something to be said in those type of areas where people are like, we have somebody in our area that does this work and they do it great. And I think there's a lot to be said, especially when you talk about builders and contractors and those type of things as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe the operational part that's been the hardest to sort of codify for me and my team, frankly, is that like it's not a exponential growth business. Instacart was an exponential growth business. Like you could go from, 10,000 deliveries one week to a million the next week. It's scaled that way. If you think about like, Gatsby's a good example, which is like my customers are custom home builders and general contractors. Yes, I would love to have hundreds of them that, I constantly get business from. But if I did that today, if I went to my team and said, "Hey, I want the top 100 builders in Austin, and if you can get me their set of their plans, I'll make them the best price possible," I would not be able to deliver that level of service that fast, right? So it's like it is a exponential out the window. It's like it's this sort of a crawl, walk, run strategy you have to think through because these, unlike some other businesses, for those type of clientele, it's repeat business. Like they're looking for a trusted trade partner that they can flip designs to or ideas to, who can continually deliver, so they can, focus forward and doing what they do best. And so, same thing for general contractors. And I think that has been the hardest part. Was you get excited and you want to really just like press on the gas, but you realize like you've got to be able to absorb that kind of level of chaos, buy it, store it, polish it, deliver it, and service it around, if there's a warranty issue, in a way that you can consistently meet expectations. Because the worst thing you can do, 6 months in, right, is light up every builder in town as a roofer or whatever brand you're in, and then just start dropping the ball everywhere, right? And that's almost impossible to overcome, frankly, if you sort of scorch earth strategy. But it's hard because you start to feel that momentum, you start to feel like you know what you're doing, and you want to move faster and faster. But you've got to sort of throttle yourself back a little bit to say like, all right, how am I going to consistently deliver? If these 10 builders sent me, 5 projects tomorrow, like how would I do that? Like, am I capable of doing that? And try to figure out how to get there in an organized manner.
Yeah. And I think too, there's a lot to be said for, you know, for the, when you talk about a custom home builder, they're not a matchstick home builder. They're not
Yeah,
doing
yeah.
the same thing. And there's a lot to be said about customization and those type of things. And I would say that what people don't understand about the glass business is obviously the glass business is like, it's not like, oh, I cut this a little too short or I chipped the corner. I mean, like that just doesn't happen in the glass business. So that's also another portion of it too, that's a big deal. When you look back on their last year, can you describe just like a typical day in the life of a business owner?
Let's see. I can probably describe a typical day in my life. I'm not sure it's everyone's thing. As I said earlier, I'm an operator first kind of guy, and so most of the time my day starts at home. Looking at the dashboard, scheduled deliveries, scheduled installs for the day. It usually starts, 8:30 down in the shop with the install team, and we have a whiteboard that's just a sort of a real version of the digital dashboard, and it's a talk through. Like, here's what's on the deck today, right? Here's what we've got to go do. Here's who's got what. And it's just like going to war. It's like you said, going. You can anticipate a play, you can practice a play, but as soon as the whistle blows, all hell's breaking loose. And the first part of the day ends up being that way. And I think maybe because I'm used to the chaos, I've done much better managing the stress of the construction environment, because not everyone's ready for that. I mean, I can tell you right now, the GC could tell you that he wants all the showers or railing installed next Thursday, but it's not up to him, right? He could not get his permit, right? He could have the flooring guy, pouring concrete on the wrong day, and you can't even access the unit. Like, it's going to happen every time. So in order to, and this is one of the secrets I learned early on, which was, how do you try to tamp down that chaos so that it doesn't financially crush you? And because, if you look at labor as a machine, right, you have a finite number of widgets you could punch out in a day. If you wake up in the morning and you've got 2 projects going, and both those projects get declined, right, moved to a different day, you're stuck with idle labor. And so, we have been pretty good about finding smaller jobs, mirrors, things that we can fabricate in our shop that we can shift around. So when we show up in the morning is a big version of that, which is schedules. What's on the trucks? Are we ready to go? Usually I've already answered the phone calls, or I'm getting the text right now, which is, this needs to move up before this. This is going to have to move to a different day. And so we're sort of quarterbacking things, and then the team's on their way. And the second half of the day, depends on the week, right? But it's mostly back in the saddle, either working with customers and clients, right? Clients, as we like to call them. We get a lot of blueprints from our general contractors and our builders, and so I'm back at my desk. I'm designing things in CAD or engineering program we design a lot of the showers in, or storefronts. And so I spend a lot of my time, bidding, right? Ultimately, like, reviewing drawings, seeing if it's something we want to do. I'm sort of, while I think I'm pretty good at showers now, like, we've done a lot of storefront, we've done a lot of commercial, and we're still not experts at it. I'm not, right? And so every time I get a bid set, I spend some time with it because I'm nervous. I'm nervous. I don't know what I'm looking at. I don't know what I'm bidding on. And so I'll spend the second half of my day sort of in some version of running my company, or, going after, the business that I feel like I can provide the most value to, which is looking through the drawings, like putting takeoffs together and trying to figure out how to price this to make it make sense for us.
Yeah. Is there one portion of any part of that chaos that you find the most rewarding?
I mean, I think everyone would be lying to you if they didn't say that, like, walking a home, like, or a project, and, like, inspecting finished work is obviously my favorite part. Like, it's the most fun. I mean, we're very lucky. Gatsby is like, we're the wow moment almost always, right? Glass is always last. And so it's like, usually if it's a home, especially if it's a singular homeowner, boy, they've been through renovation. They're like a year behind schedule. They're exhausted, and this is like the moment that things start to feel like they're coming together. If it's a restaurant, you're getting closed in, so you're now getting, to air conditioning, and you're getting to security, and so they're starting to feel like the restaurant, or the sort of the we're doing a Trader Joe's. The Trader Joe's is starting to come to life now, and so that part to me is fun. It's so fun to, 2 months ago, I saw a random 2-dimensional drawing, made some calls on how much storefront it would take and what kind of glass, and then, to be able to go, peek over the shoulder of the team and see it come together in real life. Like, that's always like the tickle moment where you're like, all right, this is pretty fun. Like, this is
Yeah.
exciting. Yeah.
That's really cool. And it's funny because, in my past life, I've done some other things in construction too. And so there's two points I wanted to touch back on. One, when it comes to general contractors and construction business, you hit the nail on the head, where in terms of, you know, the plumber didn't do this, or the concrete guy didn't have it. It just is a thing that it's a roadmap of the worst directions possible. And you know that there's no way you can fit in. You fit in when they say you're in, right. Usually it's like right now or tomorrow. There's a lot to be said for me in my life. I've always been a shower person. What I mean by that is, I love to go into a custom home, or look at showers and go, man, look at that. When I was in college, I actually used to hot mop shower pan before we
Oh
used to
yeah.
have to hot
Yeah.
mop
Yeah.
those.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I've been in some massive custom showers, but I always thought to myself that it was the coolest thing to go back to that house long after and look and go, man, look at that. It looks incredible. So yeah, that's pretty rewarding, I would assume, for you and for your team.
What's funny is you mentioned, like, the chaos of it, and what's funny is, as you hire people and you bring people on your team, but obviously if you're an entrepreneur, or if you're a business owner, your team is more broad. Your team is your wife or your spouse, right? Your children. They're all part of the game. And it's funny to me, like, the first 6 or 8 months, like, my wife, she's an advertising executive. She's always been in a very linear career and always enjoyed it. And she honestly said something one time that I would have normally found offensive, but it was like, I was having that conversation just about like, honestly, like a back and forth, like you just said, like, hey, we had this scheduled and this happened. And then like team couldn't go do this. And she was like, are you just bad at planning? And I was like, well, no, I'm not. Like, it's like, this is how it works. Like, every day it's like this. And, and I think that is something that, for a lot of the trades within, horsepower and specifically at Gatsby as well, is like, you have to know that going in. It can, that can be a very daunting moment if you're thinking, they said it's the 14th, we're going to install on the 14th, and all I have to do is be ready to install on the 14th. It's like, that is not how this works.
Yeah, and I think to your point too, when you talk about the playbooks and the processes, I would agree with you that for each of the businesses, the playbooks and the processes are there. But if you turn the pages and you looked at the page number, it's 1, 7, 31. So
Exactly.
you gotta be able to flip back and forth in the playbook to find that day. It could be anything. It could be you're talking stand strong fencing and everything is lining up and then it rains. It's like, okay, well, we can't do that day. Or same thing with a roof. I think that there's a ton to be said. It actually goes right into my next question. My question was going to be, what advice would you give someone thinking about becoming a business owner? And I think to your point, it's like the flexibility while keeping a steady mindset is one of the biggest things.
Yeah, I mean, you wish there was a way you could condition yourself to be good at that if you weren't, because it is truly like, you will definitely get distracted by the chaos if you can't control it, right? Um, there's so many exciting things about being a small business owner, right? You're ultimately responsible, which is, for some folks, a moment they've been waiting for, right? They've been working for someone else, answering someone, being responsible for other people's ideas. And so that first and foremost is probably the most important, I think, rewarding part for a lot of folks. Just like, hey, you're setting the sails, you're setting the direction, and when you get there, you get close to there, and you reset the sails, like you can feel different about it as opposed to having inherited someone else's vision for where you're going. But I think the hardest part is how do you prepare people for day one, right? And day 30 and day 40, and I think a franchise does that better than someone on their own. Let's start with that. A franchise that's going through the motions at with more than one location. So that's why, again, like why I love horsepower. You're sort of got 600 revolutions happening, and so there's rapid learning. But I don't know. It's one of those things where I think most people are capable of much more than they think they are, but you just got to tip your toe over the starting line. Like it's like I don't know if you have children, but when you have children, everyone tells you what they think is going to be like.
Yeah,
And you have an idea in your head of what you think it's going to be like. And then it happens and you go, holy, like, this is
yeah.
crazy. And then eventually you settle in.
I have 19, 6, and 3.
Wow. You've seen many things then.
Yeah, and not to, but like, in the last year, my 3-year-old, who's great and healthy now, has had 2 open heart surgeries. It's like, you're right. You see things and you're like, it's the chaos. It's the navigating the chaos. You go back to, hundreds of years ago when people had to come over on ships. You want to be like, they're probably better equipped because who knows what happened on that ride. You know what I mean?
Yeah. They knew chaos way before they got there.
Correct.
And it's funny. It's funny because I think as someone who loves entrepreneurship and I sort of have these networks of entrepreneurs in different not just at Gatsby but other industries, and we'll go to these happy hours and these networking events, and it's always great to hear that other people have the same problem as you, which it's sort of that empathy of like, okay, I'm not crazy. But I do think it is one of those things where you have to start finding your network, right? If you're going to be a small business owner, small business owner is the wrong word. If you're going to own your own business, hopefully it doesn't say small, right? But if you're going to own your own business, like you got to start to find that network, right? Those people that can help you through those moments of chaos and sort of coach you through it. And it's probably different, especially if you're in a corporate world. It's different from your boss. It's different from your mentor that for the last 10 years. These are folks who've sweated payroll before, right? Who have ordered something totally wrong, and totally missed a deadline for a big client, and worked through it and lived through it. And so I do think it is important from a, sort of a mental standpoint to, that you realize your team is not just your team, it's your bigger team, it's your spouse, it's your children, but you've got to actively find that network to sort of give you that extra umph. It's great marketing, right? These are people that end up becoming customers as well. And I think there's some great networks for that. But, I think first and foremost is it sounding more to keep your sanity.
And there's also a lot to be said for that in terms of franchise versus starting your own business as well. As you are able to, while they might not be a customer for you, but you are able to call on other owners that have been in it longer than you or less than you or vice versa,
Yeah, we
just
will.
and just kind of, what we call spitball ideas or just like vent for a second and just realize, hey, I also, I might call you and say, Chad, I'm thinking about doing this. What's your thoughts? And you might say, well, we did that. And if I had to do it again, I would do this, but I would also do that. And you, okay, that's great insight that you can't just get from just starting a business and just calling people off the street.
Yeah, no, 100%. In fact, I think we're probably one of the luckier brands at Gatsby because our product is not, it's more design oriented. And so if you think about the teams channel, so we call it the shout out posts, but early on it was just people posting, cool pictures, but now it's like, every time I see a new thing on our shout out thread, I'm like, I've never seen gridded showers like that. I've never seen someone put beer on the ceiling. Like it instantly sort of sets the bar a little bit higher. You're like,
Well, everybody's driving the ball down the
yeah,
field,
it's
right?
it's not only driving the ball down the field, but it's like, the first phone call is like, how'd you price that? Like, where'd you source that hardware? I think because of what we do, it probably happens faster than some other brands. It's kind of hard to probably do that in roofing or some other ones. But I definitely think like we have shots on goal, right? How many times have you seen this type of shower or this type of storefront or this type of railing? Because we're part of a franchise, I'll see 60 different designs in a month and only 4 are mine, right? Or 5 are mine. And so it's like, oh, I now know what's out there and what what is what we are capable of as a brand, and I've got a way to sort of back into how to get it. And so that
Yeah,
to me
very
is
cool.
huge. Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah, very cool. Because then you're right. There's other people that have a different design eye and a different, there's different demographics around the country that expect and want different things. And being able to have that Rolodex of information of what you can back into, whether you've even thought about it, is probably invaluable. Is there, it could be from Gatsby, it could be from any other part in your career. Is there like a lesson or a mistake from your experience that you think every business owner should hear?
A lesson or a mistake? That's a good one. I'm trying to think it through. That would be helpful. I think I mentioned it earlier, and I think this can go without saying, which is maybe it's half, but half of people who start a franchise, at least the ones that I've noticed coming through doors, are doing it solo, right? And this is actually my first time doing anything technically solo, right? The other things I did, I was part of a founding team. I was, whatever, early employee, and so there was a camaraderie that came with that, and sort of a de-stressing moment that came with that because you could take hard things to each other and sort of mind share it and try to figure it out, right? And I think the first year or so, I sat with a lot of things, longer than I needed to, more personally than I needed to. You sort of feel the weight yourself and you don't feel like you can explain it to anyone, or you don't want to burden anyone else with that, that complexity. It can feel a little isolating that first year or two, or until you find that network of folks. Maybe it's within your brand, right? Other brand owners, which we certainly have, or it's, guys in adjacent industries that you're friends with. Maybe it's first customers, but then they become friends, and sort of. Yeah, but I do think that if you think about all of the trades and small businesses that you work with, and coming in and out, anytime there's a founding team, there's definitely a different way of operating than like a solo founder. And I think I've tried to tell folks who have looked at Gatsby like, hey, understand that going into it. Like it's like you don't it's not good for you. Like, like in the sense like if there's a really complicated thing you're working through, like I need to fire my first employee because they're just not the right fit. Or, I didn't plan for this well. And so you can sit with that longer than you need to, and it will distract you from, what's the real prize to move, left foot, right foot. Because that's really what entrepreneurship is. It's left. Can you put your left foot after your right foot? You were going to fall. You were going to fail. You're going to jack someone's shower up. You're going to break some glass. Like it's going to happen. It's like, and and just when you think it's not, it will happen again. And so, sort of your grit and persistence through that, is you can earn it just because you're headstrong, or you can figure out ways to find the right people to have around you and to bounce things off of so that you can get through those moments faster and get on to the next problem.
Yeah, that's really good. I think that there's a lot in that message, but it's also making sure that you're thinking through that. And to your point you made earlier, can I work through that chaos? Can I understand that? Can I lean on people? So for you, what's next for you? I know you've been through it. You kind of went through a little bit. Do you see yourself, I don't know, scaling more locations, just focusing on operations, perfecting current operations? Like, what's next for you?
Yeah, so I think so for us right now, the next 3 to 5 years is scaling. So we've taken over more of the market recently. So we own all of Boston. We're looking at some of North San Antonio. So we're looking sort of expanding our geographic territory, and we've already done so. So we're sort of working through that. But it's how do you 10x from here, right? So my first year is X, and my third or fourth year is pegged this. And I'm looking at that as, okay, I think I understand the product. I think I understand how it gets done, how it gets priced, how it gets installed. But how do you do that at scale? How do I do 5 of those a week? How do I do 10 of those back to back to back? What does it look like? Like, do I need a different shop? Do I need different people? Do I need a purchasing person who can manage the purchasing? And so, sort of, if you invent the problem you're going to have, yeah, you can sort of work it. You can work it backwards. And so we're sort of right now we're just saying, hey, if we got to $5 million a year in a couple of years, like how do we pull the Legos out and go back to like what problems are we going to run into, right? You sort of and some are obvious, and some are less obvious. Like the first one is I think anyone's listening to this, it's an owner is gonna you're when you go from 0 to 1 million, it's as one of my buddies who's in the trade business said is like it's the hardest jump, and it's like don't worry about everything until you get to the first million. Like I know you're trying to optimize for efficiency, but like you're not gonna be as profitable as you want to be until you get to the first million. There's just so many things you've got to work through. Like there's so many consistency. Are you consistent every month, every week? Like do you fire clients or are your clients good? Do you get repeat business? Like you don't learn that for a little while. You sort of figure that piece of it out. But to go from 1 million to 5 million, now you're past the owner operator. Like you are not ordering everything, right? You are not the only person who's handling client phone calls. And so then it's like, okay, are you ready to be a manager, right? Are you ready to be a leader? And for a lot of folks, that is taking off a hat you wore proudly for a year, right, and fought for the year before that, right, and then reinventing yourself for the next run, right?
Yeah, I think there's probably a ton of that goes into, like you said, building your team and growing your team. There's also, as you look as a builder and you say, okay, these are the puzzle pieces that I think are going to be involved in the next step. The ones that you don't see yet are the ones that are going to be, you just got to be able to handle those. And I think, from the sounds of it, you guys are working through it, and I think you guys are going to do a fantastic job. So I'm excited to see what your future looks like for that.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it, Dave.
Yeah. So, again, this has been the Franchise Frontier podcast. Want to thank Chad for being on, and providing great insight and some great stories about some things that he's worked through and how he's seen his business grow. So until next time, keep pushing forward, keep connecting, keep diving into your why, building your future. Thank you.